Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to today's midday bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, the merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative and exciting uploads I put out twice daily, click that bell icon. And finally, last but definitely not least, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's midday bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. I'm going to caution you that I know I sound crazy when I tell you about this experience, but this is the God as my witness, right hand to God truth. This experience takes place a few miles north of a little town called Caroline, Shawano County. It's in north central Wisconsin. This happened during the summer of 2002, back when I was 15. I lived on a small dairy farm that had about 80 acres behind the farmhouse. Butted up against our land was our neighbor's property. That was mostly wooded, but there was a small pond that went through both of our property lines. Now, of course, being 15, I was free to move between our property and the neighbor's, as long as I didn't bother his cattle and whatnot. I was usually out there with a little .22 LR or a pellet gun, just wanting something to move. The weeks leading up to this, I have vivid memories of finding an unusual amount of deer and calf carcasses around the pond. Maybe about 5 or 6 in a 3-week period. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it because we had lots of black bear around here, and they usually kill sick deer or can steal off with a calf every now and then. Whatever the case, it didn't raise my suspicion until about the beginning of August. My bedroom was on the second floor of the house, and I had one window facing out back toward our land. Looking from the window, the right plot was mostly straw and the left plot was corn. Fence divided the two fields, starting at the southern corner of our house, so simply put, you could see both fields clearly from my room. Under my window was a small backyard that was kind of cut into the hayfield, where my mom had a rather large garden. Our house was built around 1920. We didn't have air conditioning or anything. During the summer, I usually slept with my window open and a small fan running in my room. One night, I was awoken by a strange sound outside. It sounded like the rooting of a pig. At least that's how I remember it. I don't remember the exact time that it happened, but I think it was probably between 2300 and 0100. As I lied there in bed listening to this weird rooting sound that was not too far outside of my window, I started to think that it was odd because my family never dealt with hogs, and neither did our neighbors. I honestly can't remember a time where I'd ever seen a feral hog in our area, nor have I heard of anyone else seeing them either. The more I thought about it, the more weirded out I got. My headboard was just to the right of the window, so the whole time this was happening, my face was only about 2 feet from the open window. But it was just a little too high for me to simply crane my head out. I didn't turn my light on in my room because the moon was outside of my window, illuminating the fields, and it was enough to see where I was going. I sat up in my bed rather quickly and kind of haphazardly flipped my covers off of me, and I put my feet on the floor. Before I could get up, however, the rooting, grunting sound stopped abruptly. I realized that whatever this thing was definitely heard me. I remember my heart rate racing, and it became harder to breathe. I sat up in my bed for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably more like 30 seconds or so. Slowly, the rooting grutting sound started again and eventually went back as much farther as it had when I initially woke up. Convinced that this thing outside had forgotten about me, I slowly stood up. What I saw next has literally haunted me for the past 20 years, and the memories are still just as vivid as the day it happened. I remember it with the utmost clarity and detail. I stood up slowly, making sure not to crack any of the floorboards as best as I could. I only had to move forward a few feet to gaze upon the spectacle outside. I looked down at my mom's garden, which was 50 to 60 feet away from the back wall of the house. And on the left side of the garden, I saw this thing. I had no idea what I was looking at, but it sure was not a pig, bear, fox, coyote, wolf, badger, wolverine, or any other animal that I could think of. I could really only see the silhouette of it because all I had was the moonlight outside. What I honestly looked like for a second was Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's what I remember thinking briefly. It was rounded over, hunched figure that seemed to be squatting on its back legs and digging very rapidly through the edge of my mom's garden. It would hop side to side, kind of like a monkey hopping about 8 inches or so, in either direction, and would keep digging. It was tearing apart the edge of the garden. After a few minutes, it rounded the edge of the garden and started digging the long side that runs parallel to the house. So its back was now facing me. Again, it was maybe 50 to 60 feet away from me, and about 15 feet down from where my window was. It did the same side hopping thing it was doing the whole time, making this really loud rutting grutting sound. Again, I can only compare it to the sound of a pig when rutting, but this thing wasn't sticking its head near the ground or anything, or at least not that I could notice. It was just digging like crazy. Now, this is where it goes from really strange to absolutely hair-raising, totally insane and terrifying. After about 5 minutes or so, this thing was digging around the perimeter of my mom's garden. It stopped digging. It stopped the rutting and grutting, and it just sat there motionless for 15 seconds or so. What happens next still gives me goosebumps. As I'm getting them, just typing this out, it raised up on its hind legs and just stood there, like a human does, facing our fields toward the woods. It stood there for about 10 seconds, then turned and faced to the right briefly, and that's when I saw the form of this thing. It was huge. It was probably 6.5, maybe 7 feet tall, with a huge barreled chest. It turned to the right just briefly, but that was enough to see how big it was from the side. So it turns and looks to the right, then starts walking on 2 legs right through the garden and about 50 feet into the hayfield. I was kind of squinting now because it was kind of disappearing into the darkness, but it dropped down back to all 4 legs and started running. As I remember, it ran much like a dog does. It ran diagonally to the left toward our fence line that divides the hay and cornfields, and leapt right over it. The fence was probably 4.5 feet high. It was an old barbed wire fence that we didn't really even maintain. It's behind that field where the pond that is between our property and the neighbors is. I remember laying back down in bed and I started to cry, not like sobbing, but tears just came out, and I started to stare at the ceiling. I don't know how long it took me to fall back to sleep, maybe 2-3 hours. I remember waking up to my mom making breakfast, and I ran outside and looked at the garden. It was definitely tore up, and I certainly was not dreaming. I ran back inside, frantically yelling to my mom and dad, telling them what I had seen, and if they didn't believe me, to look at their garden. My mom went out there and said, "Oh, it's just some animal that had torn through looking for food." I tried explaining everything that I had seen that night, and they just stared at me like I was speaking Chinese, said I was dreaming or I was mistaken. Later on, my mom filled in all those holes and straightened out the garden again, so there was no visible trace of what was there. I never went back to the pond again, because at that point, and to this day, I am convinced that this thing that I saw was the one responsible for killing all those deer and calves. I never went back there the next 5 years that I lived at that house. When school started again, I cautiously asked some of my friends that lived near the area if they had ever seen anything out of the ordinary, and none of them had. I tried telling a few people what I saw, but they just laughed and called me an idiot or I was a loony, and that was the end of that. The thing that I can compare to what I saw is a werewolf, how they are depicted, most notably the Lycan from Underworld. That movie put me into paralysis the first time I saw it because of how closely it resembled what I saw that night. Long story short, after the first few weeks of school my junior year, I just simply never talked about what I saw again that night. I only told my wife about 3 years ago what had happened, which is about 17 years after I saw it. I know she believes me that I saw something out there, but I think she is under the impression that I've dramatized it quite a bit, which is not true. After I told my wife about it, she asked me if I had ever looked online or done any research into the strange sightings in Wisconsin, and I honestly hadn't until now. It didn't take too much time to find a beast called the Beast of Bray Road, which has been spotted in central Wisconsin for decades. Reading some of the first-hand accounts of other people only solidified that I did see what I saw, and some of the artistic renderings are spot on. One of the most obvious questions I'm going to get is, what did the prints look like? The truth is, I don't know. When I went outside that morning, I wasn't examining for prints. It was to make sure that the garden was indeed ripped apart and I wasn't dreaming. Another question I've got is, why didn't your parents investigate it? Well, I don't know that either. I think my mom was just so convinced that it was just another animal that she didn't even want to bother to look at it. There were all sorts of critters up there, to include wild dog, coyote, wolves, so I can imagine that any print that thing left would have resembled either of those three. Another question is, why didn't you go back out with your mom to look around? Easy answer is, I lived on the operating dairy farm. After breakfast, I was off to the barn. My little monster fantasy wasn't enough to keep me from cleaning stalls and liming the barn. Today's second experience. A couple weeks before hunting season for white-tailed deer in central Texas, myself and my partner discovered that hogs had been rooting up the oats and generally causing havoc and scaring away deer from our feeder. We'd gone out a handful of times in the last 2 weeks before season opening, attempting to catch the miscreants at it. So far, no luck. Very frustrating. At any rate, because of the hogs, I had been spending more time in the stand after dark than I had in my entire life. We had been there from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., and every other weird time slot you can think. I mention this just in case it's relevant or helps paint the picture. There have been a few things that have happened that I've struggled to explain away or rationalize, and my partner is out of ideas as well. First thing happened about a week and a half, 2 weeks before season. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning with a decent chunk of moon illuminating the area. I was only half paying attention to my surroundings because I had already written off the night as a bust when all of a sudden I became aware of a weird whirling flapping sound. I thought it originated from something behind me, but my partner said he heard it coming from away and in front to the left of us. At any rate, it was loud, airborne, and passed quickly over us. I am very familiar with the sound drones make, and this was not it. It also wasn't a helicopter. The sound was too small, if that makes any sense. And it was not a bird. It sounded mechanical. And this flapping, very low, probably just above the tree line. Couldn't see a thing. Second thing happened about a week before season. We weren't in the stand, but it was weird and out of the norm, so I'll mention it. We live on the same property that the stand is on. It was around 9 or 10 at night when all of a sudden there was a distant boom, like an explosion which hit our home with a thud. If you've ever spent any time around heavy artillery or explosives, you'll know what I mean. It was strong enough that my sister-in-law, who lives down the road, called us asking what just happened. It could have been a natural gas explosion, but the weird part is that my partner did some internet digging and a local emergency management website had posted asking for any info on an unknown explosion. During that time, we still have no clue of what it was. And finally, we were out at our stand once again. It's gotten cold and there was a ton of rain all day, so everything was damp, dripping. We went out at 10 and it was about 10:30. I was preoccupied with trying to keep my fingers and toes warm when suddenly I became aware of a weird murmuring. My partner heard it as well, but he has hearing damage, so I don't think he heard the full breadth of tones. To me, it kind of sounded like muffled voices off in the distance, like several someones having a conversation too far off to make out individual words, but the direction of the sounds were coming from doesn't have any buildings or dwellings, it's just woods. And there were several different tones. My partner said it kind of sounded like a cow mooing, but not quite. There are cattle in the area, and we hear them vocalizing all the time. This was not that. And there isn't any grazing land in the vicinity of where the sounds were coming from. They carried on for maybe 30 seconds, slightly rising in crescendo and then dying off and fading away completely. I want to stress how indistinct these words or sounds were. Sorry, guys. If I hadn't been listening intently, I don't know if I would have heard it. All of this, coupled with the general gut feeling I have whenever I'm out alone in the dark, has me wondering. I don't necessarily feel in danger, just generally watched or noticed. I have very good instincts and I try to listen to them. I'd love to know what you guys think. There may be rational explanations for all these phenomena. All I know is I don't want to be another hunter with another creepy story, but I feel like I am starting to see a bell curve emerge. I'd like to add that I am not a noob in the woods. I've spent most of my life outside. I grew up camping, hiking, during almost all times of the year, sleeping on the ground in a tent. You get used to hearing nature moving around at night. I spent 6 years active duty in the military, so I've been exposed to some military-grade tech. And what that I might look and sound like, obviously, there's top-secret crap hardly anyone sees, but still. I have also worked during all hours of the day and night outside. This is the first time in my life, aside from one-off experience I had at camp growing up, that anything out of the ordinary has happened when I've been outside or to hear it. In fact, I've always joked that I must be some kind of deterrent for paranormal activity because nothing ever happens when I'm around. More than likely, there are rational, ordinary explanations for the sounds that we heard, but I also trust my gut. And if something feels hinky, it usually is. All right, guys, this is a crazy story I found out of the newspaper or news media. And I just thought I'd kind of share it with you because it's absolutely insane. Man fired shotguns at aliens on neighbor's property. The suspect stated to me that the aliens have been relentlessly attacking him via telepathic communication, Deputy Dustin Winter states. A man was charged with felony reckless endangerment after firing a shotgun at aliens on his neighbor's property. At 7:30 p.m. March 21st, Sheriff's Deputy Dustin Winter responded to reports of an intoxicated man shooting at his neighbor's property. Jamie Lee McGuire told the deputy that he was the one firing the shots, and for good reasons. McGuire informed Winters of a relentless attack on him from telepathic aliens. The suspect stated to me that the aliens have been relentlessly attacking him via telepathic communication. McGuire believed that he had saw a number of aliens in the area and was experiencing telepathic communications and attacks. The suspect stated that he saw the aliens in a block storage building on the other side of his neighbor's property. Winter wrote in his report, after a period of waiting and surviving psychic attacks from his alien neighbors, McGuire decided to do something about it. The suspect told me that he ran and got his shotgun and began shooting at the aliens, Winter says. After initial questioning, Winters noticed that McGuire appeared to be intoxicated. When questioned, McGuire admitted to being under the influence of meth during their conversation, and still also smoked meth the previous night. The suspect spontaneously told me that he smokes meth because it makes him feel better, and that it helps block the telepathic communication from the aliens, Winters continued. Next article that I found, man claims he fired shotgun at aliens on neighbor's property after he smoked meth. March 24th, 2022, police said a man who stated he had smoked meth prior to firing a shotgun at aliens on his neighbor's property Sunday evening was charged with felony reckless endangerment. Jamie Lee McGuire, 43, at 2050 Pressman's Home, Rogersville, allegedly told HCSO that using meth blocks telepathic attacks from aliens. HCSO Deputy Dustin Winters stated in his report that around 7:30 Sunday he responded to a report of an intoxicated man shooting at his neighbor's property on Pressman's Home Road. Upon arrival, Winters spoke to McGuire, who allegedly admitted to firing the shots. The suspect stated to me that the aliens have been relentlessly attacking him via telepathic communication, Winters stated in his report. The suspect stated that he saw the aliens in a block storage building on the other side of the neighbor's property. The suspect told me that he ran, got his shotgun, and began shooting at the aliens. Winters stated in his report that McGuire appeared to be under the influence of meth during their conversation, and McGuire admitted to having smoked meth in the previous night. The suspect spontaneously told me that he smokes meth because it makes him feel better, and that it helps block the telepathic communication from aliens, Winters stated in the report. McGuire was arraigned Monday in Hawkins County Sessions Court and was held on $5,000 bond pending a preliminary hearing set for April 4th. All right, guys, just a quick little midday bonus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting this channel. It really does mean everything to me. Thank you for all your well wishes and prayers. Also, guys, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Why? Well, these things are out there watching our children, our pets, our family. We need to be watching them. We need to keep an eye on our loved ones, our pets, because if they're watching them, then they are not safe. And my firm belief is we are not sheep. We are and should be, in my own personal belief, the apex. Not some creature running around the woods terrorizing people. God bless you all.